This week on The Inside Story, more than 100 days of fighting following the October 7 Hamas terror attacks in Israel. A humanitarian catastrophe for civilians living in Palestinian territories. The violence spills into the region and abroad as proxies join the fight. Plus, allegations of war crimes and demands for a ceasefire. Now, on The Inside Story, expanding tensions.
Hi, I'm VOA's Jessica Drury. This week on The Inside Story, we look at the escalating tensions in the Middle East as the Israel-Hamas war creates a humanitarian catastrophe and the UN calls for an immediate ceasefire. The far-reaching consequences of this conflict show no sign of easing, with a case against Israel at The Hague and strikes against Iran-backed Houthis as they attack key trade routes. Up first, we take a look at those Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea and the escalating counterstrikes by the US and its allies. The US is redesignating the Houthis a terrorist organisation. Here's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb on Iran's efforts to destabilise the Red Sea and beyond.
The U.S. on Wednesday called Houthi militants a terror group after about 30 attacks on international shipping lanes since mid-November.
If the Houthis cease the attacks, we can certainly reconsider this designation.
If not, the United States and Britain could launch more attacks against Houthi radar sites, launch sites, and drone and missile facilities inside Yemen.
The Houthis need to ask themselves how much of their capability do they want degraded and disrupted in light of these illegal, reckless, and dangerous attacks.
It is exceptionally long overdue, and it's still not even a complete restoration.
Critics of the administration, like FDD's Behnem Ben Talablu, say more needs to be done against the Houthis, who serve as proxies for their military supplier, Iran.
This is a neo-colonial project the Islamic Republic is engaging in to establish proxies and footholds across the Arab heartland of the Middle East, to be able to have them fight the ideological adversary of the Islamic Republic, which is the Jewish state in the Middle East.
Iran supplies illicit weapons to violent proxies across the Middle East, in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. This month, U.S. forces boarded this small boat off the coast of Somalia and confiscated several advanced conventional weapons bound for Yemen and made by Iran. Iran denies supplying the Houthis with missiles, despite repeated evidence to the contrary.
Iran has this proxy strategy which aims to put distance between it and threats and to create deniability. But with this newfound missile power, the regime is actually quite content in showcasing this itself.
Tehran carried out deadly missile strikes inside Iraq and Pakistan this week, angering its neighbors. Islamabad recalled its Iranian ambassador as Iraqis in the northern Kurdish region launched massive protests. Carla Babb, VOA News, The Pentagon.
January 14 marked 100 days since the terror attack in southern Israel, in which Hamas killed 1,200 people and seized 240 hostages. The Israeli military response has resulted in tens of thousands of deaths, with Gaza health authorities putting the figure at over 24,000. The scale of casualties prompted rallies worldwide, including here in Washington, where pro-Palestinian supporters called for a ceasefire. Veronica Balderas Iglesias examines the effect of the conflict on civilians.
It has been 100 days since Hamas fighters launched a terrorist incursion into Israel, killing 1,200 people and kidnapping about 240 others. At least 105 of them have been released since the October 7 incursion, but many are still being held captive, missed by their loved ones.
Prisoned without food, without light, without water, without any inhuman conditions.
Israel's air and ground military operations in Gaza, which aim to destroy the militant group, have killed an estimated 24,000 Palestinians. A large percentage of them women and children, according to the Hamas-run Health Ministry in Gaza. More than 85% of Gaza's population of 2.3 million have been displaced. Among them, Heba Bakr, who is 6 months pregnant.
I will have a child. I'm worried about my due date. Where am I going to give birth? How will they treat me when I give birth?
From the Vatican, Pope Francis renewed his calls for peace.
War itself is a crime against humanity. People need peace. The world needs peace.
Demonstrations in Rome, London, and Washington over the weekend also demanded an end to the war. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not bowing to public pressure.
At this moment, what comes first is to cover the expenses of the war and to allow us to conduct the war in the coming year and complete it, including the elimination of Hamas, including the return of our hostages.
On Saturday, Osama Hamdan, a senior official with Hamas, which is a U.S. designated terror group, said the captives are being taken care of. He also referred to a deal that Israel said it had brokered with Qatar to deliver medicines for the hostages.
We are keen to treat them, but we will treat them with whatever medicine is available that reaches our people. And here we thank our brothers in Qatar who took the initiative to send medicines.
With no end to the conflict in sight, rallygoers in Tel Aviv stood in silence for 102nd Sunday, representing the number of days hostages have been held captive. Pauses in civil and commercial activities were also announced by Israel's Labor Union Federation, marking the solemn benchmark in the war. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News.
Citing grave concerns over those tensions, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Here he is in his own words.
More than 100 days have passed since the horrific 7 October attacks by Hamas that claimed the lives of more than 1,000 Israelis and others and resulted in the brutal seizing of hostages. Nothing can justify the deliberate killing, injuring and kidnapping of civilians or the launching of rockets towards civilian targets. At the same time, the onslaught on Gaza by Israeli forces over these 100 days has unleashed wholesale destruction and levels of civilian killings at a rate that is unprecedented during my years as Secretary General. And the vast majority of those killed are women and children. The long shadow of starvation is stalking the people of Gaza, along with disease, malnutrition, and other health threats. Tensions are also sky high in the Red Sea and beyond, and may soon be impossible to contain. There is one solution to help address all these issues. We need an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to ensure sufficient aid gets to where it's needed, to facilitate the release of the hostages, to tamp down the flames of wider war, because the longer the conflict in Gaza continues, the greater the risk of escalation and miscalculation.
With the fighting in Gaza ongoing, VOA continues to provide coverage from the region. Earlier, I spoke with our correspondent, Celia Mendoza, in Jerusalem.
Right now, we can sense the tension that keeps building up between the people in the area of the border towns that were attacked during the October 7 attack by Hamas, but also within the areas like Jerusalem that are close to the West Bank. Over the past few days, the members of the government has been very clear about the necessity to implement a plan for Gaza, but tensions keep rising within the ground, and the sense of security for the Israeli people is every day more uncertain. Just over the past few days, we saw an attack within one of the towns close to Tel Aviv, where 2 Palestinians were able to hijack 2 cars and ram into other cars, killing a lady and wounding at least 15 people. That is an evidence of the tensions that keep growing up. And of course, we have information about what it will be the next phase of the war, according to the military here in Israel. They're trying to wind up their operations on the northern part of Gaza, and eventually that will happen on the south.
And with that, when you talk about those tensions, I mean, we just passed the 100-day mark of the war and Israel's coming under international pressure over the humanitarian crisis. What can you tell us about that aid situation?
That keeps being something very challenging on the ground, according to the United Nations, especially Mr. Martin Griffiths, who is in charge of the emergency assistance for that agency of the UN. It could be at the verge of a famine and the possibility of having health crisis that goes into a terrible situation within the next days. According to the United Nations, they have not been able to provide as much help as they need to provide within Gaza, and also children, as well as pregnant women and other vulnerable individuals are not able to get assistance due to the security measures and also the conflict that continues on the ground.
And with that being the case, what is your sense of public opinion at the moment in terms of support for the war, both on the Israeli and the Palestinian side? Is what we're seeing happen to the civilians, the sort of innocent parties to this, swaying public opinion one way or the other?
Inside Israel is a sense of patriotism and anger against the attacks of October 7. Within the news is not a lot that you can see from what is happening in Gaza beyond the daily reports of the IDF, the advancements, the attacks, as well as the tunnels and everything they found in Gaza. What is happening and what we have seen on international media in terms of the over 24,000 people killed, at least 10,000 of them children, according to the Ministry of Health of Palestine, and some of that data backed by the United Nations is not well heard or known or distributed within Israel. But what we have seen is a focus on the kidnapped victims. Over the past few days, the video was released by Hamas alleging that one of the victims was hurt and 2 were killed. And the government has claimed this is a form of mental terrorism, psychological terrorism. And that also is something that over the past 3 months has penetrated within the feelings and the emotions of the Israeli people. They have lost their sense of security. And that also allow them to support a lot of the actions by the government, some of them the military action, but their questions come specifically on when all the kidnapped and the hostages will be released and how the government is trying to get them back.
You mentioned about media access and what people on the ground are getting in terms of access to information. Among the civilian casualties, we've seen more than 80 journalists killed so far since October 7, nearly all Palestinian. More than a dozen are detained. As a journalist, how easy and safe is it to move around to get these stories?
Moving within Israel is easy and safe. The government has established a process for journalists to be able to enter the country. You have to have a credential. They have to know you're here. You're able to get access through the IDF, and that's something that allows for them to present their side of the story and access to that part. However, getting access to Gaza so far has been impossible independently.
The Israel-Hamas conflict is having ripple effects across the region, with the US and Western allies striking the Iranian-backed Houthi in Yemen. Today, I'm joined by Siamak Daganpour, a senior correspondent with VOA's Persian service, who has travelled to the region and been reporting on the conflict since the beginning. Siamak, welcome to The Inside Story. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Jessica.
So to start with, I just want to get an idea of the significance of the maritime regions that are seen to be at the heart of the strikes that we're seeing in against the Houthis at the moment.
Yeah, you know that about 12% of world global trade passes through Suez Canal via Red Sea. That shows the significance of this waterway. But historically speaking, the Bab el-Mandab, which is the choke point lead to Red Sea, where the Houthis are controlling, means in Arabic the gate of grief. And it shows that historically that place has been the place of accidents, piracy, and so many other things that makes that spot very significant. A few years ago, it was 2022, we were flying over from Israel to Jeddah, where President Biden was meeting GCC leaders. Then from up there, you get the full scope of how tight is that waterway. Probably about 40% of it is very shallow. It's about maybe 100 meters or so. It's a very tight waterway, many ships going through, and I'm sure you know that because of what happened in the past few days, many of these shipping companies stopped going through this. So now the trip that they have to go through is maybe 9 to 10 days longer. They go to the other way around Africa, which makes it more costly for the economy. And some of the companies, some of the factories in Europe and other places, they stop producing whatever they had because of the issues that Houthis have created.
And what's Iran's connection to the Houthis and their sort of support for what is happening with these attacks on this sort of maritime trade?
Yeah, it's interestingly, Supreme Leader Khamenei, Iran's leader, just today, he praised Houthis for what they have done in terms of these attacks that they are conducting. He started talking about his Houthis movement more than 2 decades ago. He, for the first time publicly, raised this issue of the connection between Iran's historically helping to establish what they call the Zaidi government in Yemen, which is some kind of offshoot of the Shia theology. And so there is a connection, and Iran always wanted to use some proxies in the region to push its revolutionary ideas and messages. Most people think that the relation is about like the last 2 decades, but it's longer. In even 60s, there were some relations between, mostly in the south, but after the civil war, 2014, when the Saudis and UAE started getting involved into civil war in Yemen, that's where the Iran and IRGC showed up there and start giving more material support to Houthis. And the Houthis and Iran have a couple of things in common. One is that both are anti-American, both are anti-Israel. And if you look at the messages that Houthis are propagating, is mostly death to America, death to Israel, and curse upon the Jews. So that's the connection between two government and a party that was safe for that.
And how does Iran sort of play on those sort of, with its proxies that have those sort of shared like anti-Israel, anti-West agenda? How is it using the conflict in Israel and Gaza to sort of lean in and sort of have its proxies almost amplify that message? Is that what you're seeing happen?
Yeah, there are two domestic side aspects of this story. One is that Iran has been, because of the recent protests, national concerns that population have been drastically weakened in terms of the legitimacy in Iran and the eyes of the many people in Iran. So Iran is taking advantage of this opportunity to push its message again in the region. And at the same time, Houthis are also not the only force in Yemen. So Houthis are also taking advantage of this opportunity to show that they are somehow in the equal footing of the Hezbollah as a major proxy in the region, and that both they have common goals of creating chaos and bogging down U.S. forces. And now they see this opportunity because of this international support for Gaza, that they think they would help them to come up with these shortcomings they had.
Mm-hmm. So analysis by AP recently showed that Hamas fights with weapons by Iran, Russia, China. How does Tehran's support of Hamas sort of play into Iran's wider sort of ambitions in the region?
Iran, as I mentioned, in terms of the ideas that had behind the proxy war, is that mostly it's been very low cost in terms of the financial aspects of their support for proxies. At the same time, the deniability option has always been there. So Iran, most of the time, don't take responsibility for what Hamas or Hezbollah and Houthis are doing. They say, oh, these are the independent groups. They do their own business. We support them. We help them. But there are many signs in terms of the missiles have been found, the technology been supported, given to Hamas and also to Houthis and Hezbollah, obviously, that these are coming from Iran. Some even anti-ship missiles that have been shot by Houthis recently. They're C-802, Chinese designed, but it's produced in Iran. So weaponry have been originated from Iran and transferred by IRGC to Hamas, to Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and Houthis. One quick note that recently that I was in West Bank, I talked to some Palestinian officials. They were very concerned about the money laundering centers that the government in Iran is conducting in West Bank. They were concerned that they are pushing the Islamic Jihad sentiment in Nablus, in Jenin, and some of the cities, because the youth are very vulnerable in terms of the message and support they may receive. So most of the stuff that's been happening in West Bank was mostly nationally Palestinian, not to be sectarian in terms of Hamas, Islamic Jihad. But now Palestinian officials, the Palestinian Authority, are very concerned about Iran's influence in the West Bank. But we have to be mindful of the fact that Iran historically had relations with PLO post-Iranian revolution. That makes it more complex, because when the Iranian officials go into the region, they don't meet with Palestinian Authority officials. They meet with Hamas, with Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah.
The UN's highest court is hearing South Africa's case against Israel for genocide. The aim? To force a ceasefire and to present evidence of what South Africa, a long-standing supporter of the Palestinians, perceives as genocidal behaviour by the Israeli military. But Israel's main ally, the US, sees the case as meritless. From Washington, Anita Powell.
Israel's war in Gaza has a new legal front, as the International Court of Justice on Thursday heard South Africa's case against Israel on charges of genocide, as it attempts to eradicate the militant group Hamas after its stunning October 7th attack on Israeli civilians. The hearing prompted protests outside the United Nations-backed court at The Hague. South Africa launched its argument that Israel has violated the 1948 Genocide Convention and compared the situation to one closer to home.
Our government has approached the International Court of Justice to prevent the unfolding genocide in Gaza. We have also asked for provisional measures which include an immediate suspension of Israel's military operations in and against Gaza. The commitment to justice and bring an end to the humanitarian atrocities in Palestine resonate deeply with the collective consciousness of the global community. The scale of these actions is reminiscent of the Rwandan genocide 30 years ago.
Officially, Israel's top ally disagrees.
We have said repeatedly that we believe these allegations, this case, is unfounded, and that there's no basis for accusations of genocide against Israel. That's not a word that ought to be thrown around lightly.
But there is no consensus in Washington, with some politicians and labor leaders supporting South Africa's call for a ceasefire and accusing Israeli forces of being overzealous. A State Department official who resigned in protest filed a document with the court in support of South Africa.
I'm not arguing that there should be a special standard for Israel, a higher one or a lower one. I'm simply arguing that there is a global standard and we need to hold all of our partners to it. And we need to hold ourselves to it. And in the case of Israel, there are laws that are simply being set aside, overlooked, interpreted differently, or acted upon differently. And that does not seem to be in accordance with the US approach to the international rule of law.
South Africa has long supported the Palestinian cause, with former President Nelson Mandela famously saying, "Our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." Analysts say this is about much more than just Israel's conduct. With a growing list of countries and entities supporting Pretoria's view over Washington's, this could have major diplomatic fallout, especially if the UN-backed court renders a judgment against Israel.
It also brings into question the countries that are continuing to support Israel and provide weapons to Israel and provide intelligence to Israel and doing all these other things. So that has huge implications for U.S. relations with other countries around the world, not just in the short term, but also in the long term. And it also undermines the U.S.'s leadership on human rights in the world moving forward if there's any grounds that are found.
While arguments are expected to conclude this week, the court could take years to render a judgment. Meanwhile, the war continues, the death toll climbs, and families suffer. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
You can stay up to date with all the latest news at voanews.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News, and you can follow me on X at Jessica Jareen. Catch up on past episodes at our free streaming service, VOA+. We'll see you next week for the Inside Story.